HIS stuff. That's how it would work. This isn't due to roll out until 2015. And that's kind of where we're at today. And then I want to turn this over to Kelly because she wants to get into some of the nuts and bolts of the information about the transformation agenda, which really is tied to a lot of this history that's occurred over the last few years.
I think I forgot to introduce myself when I started. I'm Kelly Kennedy, I'm the Director of Day Services here at Hilltop. And welcome to our home away from home for many of us. So, Chris gave you a backdrop of what is going on in New York, but this is about what I'm going to talk about is how it affects people day in, day out on the front lines, how we receive services, how we deliver services, okay? So Chris talked about managed care, and the federal government wants to go ahead.
Sure. The changes, or with this bill that's been passed, are the changes still going to be drastic as they?
Great question. The question is, with the money being restored, are we still looking at dramatic changes, essentially? And the answer is yes. The changes, the money being restored is excellent news. I mean, it's wonderful news because we did not know where we were going to cut later this year to make up the difference. But this is above and beyond that. They're two kind of unrelated topics to some degree. So it's important that the reason we wanted to have this family forum is so that people understand this transformational agenda. Because it is, I've been doing this for 22 years, this is absolutely the biggest change I've ever seen in the field. I mean, people who've been around a lot longer probably have seen other dramatic changes, but this absolutely is the biggest change I've seen. And it makes a huge impact on the day services aspect of people's lives, where they go to program. So, Chris talked about the managed care and the waiver. Well, New York State went to the federal government and they applied for a waiver. It's called 1915B waiver. And it wasn't going very well. The federal government and New York State were not in agreement. The federal government wasn't happy with some of the practices New York State did. And in fact, some of the New York Times articles impacted the way that the federal government negotiated with New York. So the federal government put demands in place. You want to get this Medicaid managed care in place, and we have things we need you to do. And that's where the transformational agenda came in. New York State and the federal government negotiated this agreement about the direction that New York will go with their services. So that has nothing to do with how the funding was restored or how New York funds services right now. It's about how they will be done in the future. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, the goals of the transformational agenda are to become more person-centered services, which, I've done this for a long time. We've always believed in person-centered services, but they're really making it more about a person getting the right service at the right time in the right way. So, for example, if there's a person who lives in an IRA and they don't need all the services that an IRA offers, they're getting overserved. That may not be the appropriate placement for them. Does that make sense to everybody? Like they might live in an IRA with lots of nursing supports and they're really healthy person, they don't need that level of support. That's what they're kind of talking about, is getting the right service to the right person at the right time. Comprehensive care coordination to meet all of a person's needs. What that means is right now, people have MSC service coordinators. How many people have a service coordinator here? A lot of people do. What that means, right now what a service coordinator does is they work with a person on disability-related issues. What is related to their disability and how they get services, okay? Like linking them to a day program, linking them to an IRA, those sorts of things. What they're talking about is making it broader, dealing with mental health issues, dealing with medical issues, as well as disability-related issues. So that would mean going into doctors, the medical field, it's greatly expanded under managed care, what is care coordinator's role is. Establishing transparent and sustainable funding. And I actually really support this. Pam, you have a question?
What is that report
asking, what's going to happen to service coordinators? Yes, that's a really good question, and a question I know Chris brings up often, as well as Jen Warner, who's here, Director of Service Coordination. We believe they're going to transfer into being their care coordinator, but the care coordinator may be working for the DISCO, may not be working for the ARC. But we don't know that. That's a gray area. We don't know the answer to that. That's a really great question, Kim. So thanks for bringing that up. Randy?
Like, is there gonna be any changes around the helicopter that
We are going to get to that, Randy.
What's that?
We're going to get to that. Yes, we need to change this here at Hilltop. And we're going to get to that. That's a really great question. I think that's why a lot of you are here tonight. Yeah. But the problem is we need to lay the groundwork so you understand where we're going, okay? So, establishing transparent and sustainable funding. Right now in New York, the funding methodology, like for how we get our rates and how people are funded, it's very complicated, and it's not necessarily always fair, to be honest, between agencies. Like how people get funded for services, it doesn't make a lot of sense all the time. So I completely agree with OPWD that they need to come up with a different funding mechanism for how they fund services. And more meaningful ways to measure quality of service. Right now, they measure quality oftentimes by regulations. Are we following the regulation? Which is important. You know, we have a lot of safeguards in place, so we keep people safe and we follow regulations. But they're looking at, is the person really getting what they want out of their life? They're moving it to kind of a different level. And I actually support them on that. I think that's a good direction to measure quality, whether a person is really enjoying the life that they have and leading the life that they have.
How do they do that? How often do they do that?
Under the current system,
Measure the quality of care.
right now, we, for example, Hilltop has an annual certification visit from OPWD staff, and they do a tour, they talk to people, they look at our paperwork. A lot of it's regulatory, though. They make sure the safeguards are in place, that incident reporting matches, you know, what we're implementing, and that's pretty much how they do it. But under the new system, they're going to be looking more at, okay, Annie, what is it you want out of your life? And then if you are or are not meeting there's 21 outcome measures that they're going to measure it against. It's a nationally recognized system that they're going to move to. But we just have started to learn about it. We don't know a lot of detail, but we are pretty heavily regulated right now, and very heavily. Deb Tuckerman's here from residential. She can probably speak much better to it than me about how many survey visits she gets. She also has a separate level of certification. She has the Office for Fire Prevention Control that comes in and separately certifies her sites. I don't have that here. So we're definitely very heavily regulated. Good question, thank you. The last transformational agenda item, which really affects the people in this room, I think, is serving people in the most integrated setting possible. And what they mean by that is in community-based settings as much as we can. People working in the community, you know, whether it's Wegmans, Walmarts, you know, local restaurants, wherever, that's integrated. And the feeling is that the philosophy is at the federal level that sheltered workshops are not integrated. I tend to disagree with them, but that is where they're coming from on that, is that sheltered workshops are not considered the most integrated setting possible. So that's where some of the information you're going to hear about in relation to workshops comes from. Does that make sense to everybody? I think there's one more point I want to make about integration. Has anyone ever heard of the Olmstead decision? It's a Supreme Court decision from 1999 where two people in Georgia sued the state of Georgia. They lived in an institution and they wanted to live in the community. And their skill level was such that they could live in the community, but there was no choices for them. There was no option to live in the community. So they sued the state of Georgia under the American with Disabilities Act, and the Supreme Court decided that Georgia was wrong, that they needed to provide options for people with disabilities so that they could live in the community, that they were being discriminated against based on their disability. And I actually completely agree with the Supreme Court decision that you should be in an integrated setting as much as you possibly can, but it's being kind of interpreted broadly, I think, in this particular case. And that's just my personal opinion, by the way. Figures my remote was working the whole time before you guys came to let it know. Okay. Let's get into the meat of it. Employment, which is really what Hilltop's all about. We love employment. We love the fact that people come to work every day and earn paychecks. That's what it's all about for us. The transformational agenda is targeting people leaving high schools, people leaving workshops, because that is the expectation, and people leaving rehabilitation programs. That's also the expectation. And we're going to move people out of day jobs into more community-based settings to have an individualized employment goal. That's kind of their goal there. Educate school districts about services including supported employment and pathways to employment. One good new point here is that we did apply for an outreach coordinator with the local DDRO, and we're hopeful to get that. And that's someone to focus on the 15 school districts that we currently serve, to go in, educate them about services, and hopefully help the students as they graduate transition into the adult world, which we're really excited about that. That's very much needed. It's huge, yeah. Jody can tell you. Huge. And we're really excited about that.